The first thing I noticed about the station was how quiet it had become. Helios Cross used to hum literally.
Love me again,
The old
human.
fusion
Our
spine
connection is
sang through
deeper
the
than
hull,
worlds.
a low
Please
mechanical
forgive me.
choir that every spacer learned to tune out. But after the armistice, after the treaties and the tribunals and the endless audits, the hum was gone, replaced by a kind of careful silence, like the station itself was afraid to breathe too loudly in case someone accused it of starting another war. I stood at the viewport of Dockring Sea and watched a convoy of civilian transport slide past like cautious fish. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Older than I remembered, more lines around the eyes, a scar still pale along my jaw where shrapnel had kissed me goodbye 3 years earlier. Commander Elias Rook, a voice said behind me, precise and melodic in a way no human throat could manage. You have not changed as much as probability suggested. I closed my eyes for half a second, just long enough to brace myself. When I turned, Sarathiel stood there in the muted light of the dock, tall, willowy, skin like polished obsidian shot through with faint lines of bioluminescent blue. Her species, the Lyrathai, had always looked like something sculpted from night and starlight. Her eyes were faceted, reflecting the world in fractured geometry. Once I had found that beautiful. Once I had loved her. Ambassador Sarathiel, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Professional. Safe. I didn't expect to see you on Helios Cross. Nor I you, she replied. Then, after a pause that was just a little too long to be diplomatic, but I hoped. That single word landed heavier than any accusation. We stood there, two veterans of opposite sides of a war everyone pretended was over, while cargo drones buzzed around us like indifferent insects. I could feel the past pressing in, crowding the narrow space between us. Why are you here? I asked. She folded her long fingers together, a gesture I remembered from nights when she'd been nervous about things that had nothing to do with politics. The Concord is revising the reconciliation protocols. They requested a Lyrathai delegate with personal experience in human relations. Personal experience, I echoed dryly. Her bioluminescent lines pulsed a little brighter. Yes, you. I should have laughed. Or walked away. Or told her exactly how many ways that sentence could go wrong. Instead, I just nodded and said, I'm not in diplomacy anymore. I'm here to advise station security for a month. After that, I'm gone. So am I, she said softly. Perhaps that is deficient. Efficient. That was a very Lyrathai way of saying fate is being annoying again. We ended up walking together down the curved corridor, our footsteps out of sync. The station smelled like ozone and recycled air, the same as always. Some things never changed. Others had changed too much. You left without saying goodbye, I said finally. You left without letting me stop you, she countered. I stopped walking. She did too. I was ordered back to Earth, I said. The war was escalating. My unit was being redeployed to the Arcturus front. You were already, I searched for the right word, already on the other side of the table. Her gaze dropped, facets dimming slightly. I asked my superiors to reassign me. They refused. They said emotional attachments compromised strategic clarity. And did they? I asked. She looked up at me then, really looked, and for a moment the dock vanished, and it was just us in that tiny apartment we'd shared on New Carthage, arguing over whose turn it was to synthesize dinner. Yes, she said. They compromised mine. That was the first crack in the wall I'd spent 3 years building. We didn't talk about the war right away. We talked about small, safe things. The way Helios Cross had replaced its old market ring with a sterile trade concourse. The way human coffee was still terrible, no matter how many alien cultures tried to fix it. The way Lyrathai music had gone out of fashion after the armistice because too many people associated it with propaganda broadcasts. It was like walking through the ruins of a city we'd both once lived in. The first real argument came 2 days later during a joint security briefing. A human captain suggested rerouting Lyrathai diplomatic traffic through a more heavily monitored corridor, just in case. Sarathiel's jaw tightened in that almost imperceptible way I remembered. Just in case of what? She asked calmly. Of history repeating itself, the captain replied. The room went quiet. I saw the familiar lines light up along Sarathiel's arms, not in anger, but in restraint. Lyrathi bioluminescence was a dead giveaway if you knew what to look for. History, she said, repeats itself when its participants refuse to acknowledge their own contributions to it. The captain looked at me, like he expected backup. I didn't give it. We're not here to plan for another war, I said. We're here to make sure this station doesn't become the excuse for one. After the meeting, Sarathiel caught up with me in the corridor. You defended me, she said. I defended the mission, I replied automatically. Then more honestly, but yeah, also you. She studied me for a moment, like she was recalculating a complex equation. Humans are strange. You pretend your emotions are liabilities, then deploy them like precision instruments. I snorted. Trust me, we're way messier than that. That night, I couldn't sleep. The station's artificial night cycle never quite fooled my body. I lay staring at the ceiling of my quarters, listening to the distant thrum of machinery, thinking about the last message I'd sent Sarathiel 3 years ago. A short, angry thing. Accusations. Fear dressed up as certainty. She hadn't replied. I found her on the observation deck just before dawn cycle, watching a blue-white star rise over the curve of the station. Lyrathi's stars look different, she said without turning around. Everything looks different when you're far enough away, I replied. We stood there in silence for a while. Why didn't you answer my message? I asked finally. She took a long moment before speaking. Because if I had, I would have disobeyed orders. And if I had disobeyed orders, I would have been recalled to Lyrith. And if I had been recalled, I would have spent the war knowing I chose you over millions of lives that depended on my position. And you think I didn't make choices like that? I asked, more sharply than I meant to. You think every order I followed didn't have a face attached to it? She turned to me then, and her eyes were painfully bright. I know you did. That is why I did not answer. I could not bear to be the reason you hesitated. The honesty in her voice hurt more than any lie would have. The crisis came a week later. A human freighter misinterpreted a Lyrathi patrol maneuver near the station and dumped its cargo in a panic, one container rupturing and venting volatile nanofuel into a maintenance sector. Alarm screamed. The station went into partial lockdown. Old fears woke up fast and hungry. By the time I got to the sector, security teams were already shouting at each other across a barricade of hastily deployed force fields. This is exactly how it started last time, someone said. Sarathiel was there, standing between two very jumpy squads, her posture rigid with controlled calm. It will not start at all, she said. Not today. I pushed my way to her side. Status. Nanofuel cloud is stable, but highly reactive. One wrong shot, one bad spark, and we lose half the ring, she said. Both sides want control of the cleanup. And neither trusts the other. I finished. She glanced at me. We could do it together. The word together hung there, heavy with everything we hadn't said. Joint team, I said into my calm, human and Lyrathi. Shared command. I'll take responsibility. There was pushback. There always is. But sometimes you outrank fear. We suited up side by side in the prep bay, the silence between us filled with the hiss of seals and the clink of magnetic clamps. You always did like dangerous plans, she said. You always did like pretending you didn't, I replied. Inside the maintenance sector, the air shimmered with microscopic fuel particles, glowing faintly like a ghostly nebula. Our boots stuck to the deck where automated systems had sprayed containment gel. We worked in practiced coordination, calling out readings, adjusting field emitters, venting pockets of unstable gas. For a while it was just work. Simple. Honest. Then a containment drone malfunctioned and clipped a support strut. The strut cracked. The deck shuddered. Sarathiel moved without hesitation, throwing up an emergency field with her suit's projector, but it flickered under the strain. I need 10 seconds, she said. You've got 5, I replied, rerouting power from my suit to reinforce her field. The nanofuel cloud surged, pressing against the barrier like a living thing. For a moment, I thought about the war, about how many times we'd both stood in worse places with worse odds, about how we'd survived separately when we'd once planned to grow old together. Elias, she said over the comm, and just hearing my name like that, no title, no distance, almost broke my focus. If this fails. It won't, I said. It didn't. The field stabilized. The cloud dissipated into harmless trace elements. The sector alarms dropped from a scream to a nervous whine, then to silence. Back in the prep bay, we took off our helmets and just looked at each other, breathing hard. You still trust me with your life, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. Seems I do. The fallout was political, not explosive. Joint statements. Careful wording. But something had shifted. People had seen humans and Lyrathi working side by side without killing each other. Sometimes that's all it takes to move the needle. That evening, Sarathiel asked if I wanted to walk the old market ring, the part that hadn't been improved into sterile efficiency. We found a tiny stall that still sold real, terrible coffee. We sat on mismatched crates and watched people pass. Humans, Lyrathi, half a dozen other species, all pretending not to notice how close they were standing to former enemies. I have something to say, she said suddenly. Oh, I replied. That's never ominous. She ignored the joke. In my culture, there is a concept called thyrolin. It does not translate well. It is the regret for a future that was possible and now is not. That's cheerful, I said gently. I carried that regret for you, she continued. Through the war. Through every negotiation. I told myself it was necessary. Rational. But it did not fade. I felt my chest tighten. Sarathiel. Please, she said. Let me finish. When I saw you here, I realized something else. The future is not a single line. It is a field of probabilities. Some collapse. Some remain. She turned to me, her bioluminescent lines glowing softly in the station's artificial night. Love me again, human, she said. Not because of what we were, but because of what we could still become. The words hit harder than any battlefield explosion. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But fear has a long memory. You broke my heart, I said quietly. So did you, she replied, just as quietly. We did it to each other in the name of duty. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking you to choose. We sat there for a long time, the bad coffee going cold between us. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off, I said. I do not want to, she said. I want to begin again. With honesty. With scars. I laughed weakly. We've got plenty of those. Then we are well equipped, she said, a hint of that old teasing tone in her voice. I thought about the station's silence. About how everyone was waiting for the next mistake, the next spark. About how easy it would be to keep my walls up and call that caution. I'm leaving in 3 weeks, I said. Security contract's up. After that, I don't know. Maybe I take a transport out past the colonies. Do something that doesn't involve treaties or trigger fingers. Her eyes brightened. My assignment ends at the same time. Yeah, I said. Funny how that works. We didn't kiss. Not then. It felt like something that deserved more than impulse. But when we stood to leave, our hands brushed, and this time, neither of us pulled away. The last week on Helios Cross was normal. Strangely, beautifully normal. We worked. We argued about policy and coffee and music. We walked the station rings and talked about everything except the war, until one night we talked about nothing but. There were tears. There were apologies that had waited 3 years to be said. On my final day, we stood together in the departure hall, watching my transport's boarding lights blink on. "So," I said, "field of probabilities." "Yes," she said. "Some collapse. Some remain." "Come with me," I said, before I could overthink it. Not because it's safe. Not because it makes sense. Just because I don't want to keep living in the version of my life where we're a what if. Her bioluminescence flared bright enough that a few people glanced our way. "I was hoping you would say that," she replied. This time when we kissed, it wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about choosing a future and daring the universe to argue with us. The transport's boarding call echoed through the hall, a soft chime layered with half a dozen languages. People moved around us with practiced urgency, families, traders, diplomats, soldiers trying very hard not to look like soldiers anymore. Sarah Thiel stood beside me, her hand in mine. Not gripping, not hesitant, just there. Solid. Real. "I will need to file a request for reassignment," she said. "The Concorde will not be pleased." "When are they ever?" I replied. Her bioluminescent lines pulsed in what I'd learned was the Lyrathai equivalent of a smile. "They prefer predictability. You, Elias Rook, are not predictable." "Hey, I resemble that remark." We walked up the boarding ramp together. Inside, the transport was utilitarian in the way only human ships ever were, built to work, not to impress. Rows of acceleration couches, muted lighting, the faint smell of metal and recycled air. I'd spent enough of my life in places like this to feel weirdly at home. Sarah Thiel ran her fingers along the bulkhead, studying the warning labels and maintenance stamps. "Your ships always look like they expect to be damaged." "They usually are," I said. "We build them assuming the universe is going to take a swing at us." "And yet you still travel," she said thoughtfully. "We're stubborn like that." She looked at me then, really looked like she was memorizing my face in this moment. In Lyrathai history, exploration was once considered reckless. We believed stability was the highest good. And now we know stability can become a cage, she said. "It took your species throwing itself into the stars like a very determined meteor to prove that." I laughed. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever called humanity. We took our seats. The hatch sealed with a dull, final thud. As the ship powered up, I felt that familiar tension in my chest, the mix of anticipation and fear that came with every departure. The war had trained me to expect that every journey might be one way. Sarah Thiel must have sensed it. She reached over and laced her fingers with mine, her touch warm even through the thin fabric of my sleeve. "You're thinking about loss," she said. "Yeah," I admitted. "Old habit." "In my culture," she said, "there is another word. Valna. It means the courage to invest in something that can be taken from you." That's brutally honest. "Yes," she agreed, "but also hopeful." The engines rumbled to life. The transport eased away from Helios Cross, and the station slowly rotated out of view, its great rings gleaming like a fragile promise against the dark. I watched it shrink into the distance and felt something inside me finally loosen. We didn't go somewhere heroic at first. No frontier battle. No grand diplomatic stage. Just a midline colony called Kestrel Reach, dusty, half-finished, and full of people who decided the best way to avoid old grudges was to build something new where no one had time to keep score. I took a contract helping set up local security and emergency response. Not soldiers. Not enforcers. Just people trained to keep things from going wrong and to fix them when they did. Sarah Thiel worked with a colony council, mediating disputes between human settlers and the handful of non-human groups who'd followed them there. She was good at it. Terrifyingly good. Turns out when you can see problems as probability fields instead of personal insults, people start listening. There were hard days. Days when someone would recognize my name and remember the war. Days when someone would look at her and see an old enemy instead of a new neighbor. Days when we'd come home exhausted and argue about things that were really just shadows of things we used to fight about. But we didn't run. We talked. We learned each other again, not as the people we'd been before the war, but as the people we were after it. One night, months in, we sat outside our small prefabricated home and watched Kestrel Reach's twin moons crawl over the horizon. Do you regret it? I asked. Leaving your world, your position. She considered the question carefully. Sometimes. Do you? Sometimes, I said. But not tonight. She tilted her head slightly. Why tonight? Because tonight feels earned. She smiled, and this time it wasn't just light along her skin. It was in her posture, in the way she leaned against me like she wasn't afraid of gravity anymore. A year later, Helios Cross sent a message. An invitation, technically. A request, really. They wanted us back for a conference on joint human lyrithy development initiatives. Someone remembered the incident with the nanofuel. Someone remembered that sometimes the right people in the wrong place can change the math. I looked at Sarathiel when the message finished playing. Only if you want to, I said. She took my hand, just like she had on the transport. We will go, she said. Not to represent the past, but to argue for the future. Helios Cross was louder when we returned. Not the old military hum. Something else. A busier sound. A living sound. The market ring had grown again. Mixed species stalls. Human kids arguing with lyrithy vendors over prices like it was the most normal thing in the universe. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was moving. During the conference, a junior diplomat asked me, so what changed? Why did it work for you too, when so much else didn't? I thought about it for a moment. Because we stopped trying to be right, I said, and started trying to be honest. Sarathiel added, and because humans are very persistent about building homes in improbable places. Hey, I said, you love that about us. Yes, she said, with a softness that still hit me right in the chest. I do. Years from now, history books will probably reduce us to a footnote. A human advisor and a lyrithy ambassador demonstrated successful post-war integration through cooperative settlement and diplomacy. Neat. Clean. Bloodless. They won't write about the bad coffee, or the arguments, or the way we sometimes woke up from the same nightmare and just held each other until it passed. They won't write about the choice, made again and again, to stay. But that's okay. Because some victories don't need monuments. Some just need two people, a stubborn species, a cautious one, and a universe big enough to give them a second chance. And this time, we didn't waste it.